please welcome to the stage Peter Zaitsev.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Oh, yes, that is, I'm saying, where is Anne took her clickers? She always takes things away from me. I don't know why. Well, and I see we had a wonderful evening yesterday because you know what I know on this early morning keynotes is the number of people in the room in the morning is reverse proportion of how good the evening went. And if a number of you here, I think the evening went pretty well. With that, let me get started. Right? Started. Oh, no. I was just like trying to figure out if it's considered dark or light. I think it's considered dark. And with that, I'm going to do now a special motion, which we didn't practice at all, which says we are going to power on the stage. You see, there is a big red button right here. It is saying on, not no. And now we are going to power on. Didn't that work wonderfully? I hope it did. With that, we are going to talk about open source as usual, and we'll start with some more polls. Right, do we? Yes, we do. Oh, wonderful. And I have asked to put some more technical polls to see is what are the titles out there? Oh, look at that. We have a lot of developers here, database administrators, and quite a few developers and engineers, and that is wonderful. And that really helps me to understand what audience I'm talking to. And the other poll we did was about, yes, what was the other poll? Let's see results. The technologies, what you folks are, and by the way, those polls are both from folks here in audience as well as from folks online. So that kind of probably explains EMEA and some Asia-Pacific dominance in the earlier polls. So yes, we can see quite a few technologies used here. I mean, as I think has been the common with Percona Live, MySQL is very high, but PostgreSQL is also catching up, getting out there. And then the last one, very relevant for this presentation, is where do we run their database technologies, right? Well, and it's interesting how many actually runs on bare metal or virtualized on-prem. I actually expected that number from a conference audience to be less, right, and more in the cloud. But I think that's also goes for online folks, right? I think in my experience, the adoption of a cloud is generally more and deeper in United States compared to some other places in the world. And surprising, nobody marked serverless, right? I thought there would be at least one adventurous person who would click serverless at least, you know, so it's not zero, but no, no one. Okay, with that, let me go to a keynote, or I will run out of time kind of talking about the put. And what we will talk about, or a question asked first, is what is the biggest factor which impacts the open source right now? Anybody? Come on, get active. You had your morning coffee. Anyone? Anyone? Okay, I see everybody is still operating in that Zoom mode, right? When we do not talk to speaker at all. No, come on, guys. I'm watching all of you, right? So please signal me with your eyes, with your hand motions, right? If you want to say like, ooh, Peter, that is a piece of bullshit, right? Yes, you can do that, right? To say, yes, that is awesome, Peter. Give me some energy, right? That also helps. Well, anyway, the answer you are supposed to give is the cloud, right? That is, I think, is the biggest factor which impacts the open source over the last few years. And I think in a database space, in particular, it's interesting how the cloud database revenue was growing, and now in 2022 is on track to surpass on-prem databases. Now, how does cloud impact an open source? I think one interesting effect is what cloud allows people to kind of hijack the limitations of a GPL license, which was often protecting the people in the past, right? Like MySQL was famously known for dual license. Hey, you know what? You want to build commercial software on MySQL and distribute it, you're welcome to do that, but you need to pay MySQL, right? With cloud, that is not really the case. And I think that is one of the reasons we see right now amount of GPL licensed software is shrinking, and we have more permissively licensed software happening in a few years. Now, how does cloud really impact the open source software? I think from one standpoint, it really helps us to simplify deployments and through that maximize adoption of the open source software. But then that also changes who is going to make money on that open source. Like MySQL is probably a great example here, right? Even though Oracle does most of the MySQL engineers, Oracle friends at AWS are making most money on MySQL, right? So that kind of changed. The thing I think to remember about the open source is this. What the open source really is not the business model. It was not designed to be, right? And the open source, you can think about that as a development model, distribution model, and it can support variety of business model, and those business models are changing now. If you know the open source, there are two big approaches or two different types of open source you can see. There is a foundation-driven open source, right? Often we may talk about that as community-driven open source, as well as single-vendor open source. And what we see is what those groups are really look at the cloud impact very differently. For foundation-based open source, there is a lot of focus on, hey, the cloud really helps to accelerate adoption. And those community tends to really embrace this effect very well. For example, you talk to PostgreSQL people, they absolutely love what the PostgreSQL is now available on all the cloud vendors. Because that is one of the reasons what PostgreSQL is now the fastest growing database, because it became so easy with that embrace of the cloud vendors. Of course, that changes who makes money on Postgres, right? But if community, that does not really weakens community, that is just a part of the evolution. If you look at a single vendor, though, these tend to be like a very venture-funded or public companies, right, which are really out there to maximize revenue they extract from that product, and they are generally quite fearful of a cloud competition, as we see. And that has caused, through the years, their fully or partially abandonment of the open source licenses, right? You can see like a pretty much who is who abandoning open source license. And to me, this is kind of even funny, right? The big bad Oracle, which was supposed to kill MySQL, right, according to some rumors, right, when acquired, they actually did not go this road, right? They do have open core model, and there is MySQL community and MySQL enterprise, but Oracle has not kind of worsened, if you like, the license for MySQL, unlike many newer and other players. If you look at the primary goal of those license changes, is this really creating monopoly in a database as a service market? For many folks I talk to, they see that is the only thing which really matters, right? Self-service running on-prem, not really as lucrative, not as much kind of rewarded by investors and market cap. So database as a service, that is a complete focus. But why database as a service for the users and customers? Well, the thing in this case is a database as a service that is the easiest way to deploy database technology. Because deploying database is actually quite complicated, and especially managing that. You don't have to just have a database. You have to figure out backups, scaling, self-healing, upgrades. All of that is more messy than they happen with, let's say, your stateless application, right? And database as a service type of deployment is really helpful because it allows developers to focus on things what matter, productivity, building applications as fast as possible. So what do I see as a monopoly with that database as a service? First, yes, we have vendors changing the licenses so they can only be the one who provide database as a service, but the rest of us being able to use that software in other environments. Well, I see that as no different than proprietary software, right? So let's not talk about that as almost open source. It's not. It's not open source. It's proprietary software, which is the license which kind of allows you to do certain things. At the same time, I think what not all is lost in this database as a service and a cloud evolution, right? I don't think what we've seen some sort of, demise of open source software and this kind of cloud restrictive licenses taken over the world. I remember being involved in a technology in early 2000s, right? And at that time, I was developing like in a PHP using VI and, like a kind of Stone Age tools. I remember Windows folks would tell me, oh my gosh, you are using such a hairy, inconvenient platform where we have all this, graphical user interface with all their, fancy stuff, right? And I think that is very similar to the state of cloud right now, when a proprietary solution are much easier and more polished than the open source one. I also remember the situation with the Solaris and Linux at that time, right? Probably somewhere in the late 90s, I remember talking to Solaris folks and say, well, Linux, 32-bit operating systems, you can't really have more than 4 gigabytes of RAM. And if somebody remembers, there was also a limit on 2 gigabytes per file size. That was like a joke, right, as people running real operating system files. But now, 20 years later, where is Solaris and where is Linux, right? I think what that shows is that the open source tend to be slow or slower, but it's inevitable. And I think that is exactly what is going to happen with the cloud as well. Yes, we have AWS and other cloud vendors which came up with a very polished, productive, but proprietary stack. But there is other work going on, such as by work of a cloud-native foundation, which is building another platform which is powerful and gets extremely more polished and extremely more powerful. And actually, if you think about the scope, how many companies, like tools or services, whatever you call it, are being built around cloud-native foundation, it probably surpasses the amount of services available from all major clouds combined. Now, am I against the cloud? Well, actually, I am not. I picked this wonderful presentation, or this slide from an early AWS presentation. You can even see some, old logo, which was comparing their cloud to the electricity, right? Well, you don't want to make your own electricity, right? Well, totally agree with you. It is very, makes a lot of sense to run the stuff in the cloud and use the cloud as commodity infrastructure provider, as electricity is, right? What does not make sense is just running their proprietary cloud services, because that would be similar to just, like buying a fridge or TV, which only works when you buy electricity from a particular provider, right? We don't do that. We want to have that flexibility. And that is a combination of the cloud vendors plus technologies from cloud-native foundations such as Kubernetes provide us. So as I was talking about the database as a service and how that is important and the open source, do we have a solution which provides database as a service experience in an open source, right, which is completely open source? Well, not really, but I think there is a lot of happening in the industry which I will call their baby steps. The first important component, what we have here, is a Kubernetes, which has become ubiquitous operating system for your data center. And I know not everybody likes Kubernetes because it's different, especially if you're coming from Linux, right? But I would tell you that Kubernetes is probably like a beer. You are expected to have that little bit of a bitter taste the first time you try it. But when, as you repeat, right, you probably turn to love it, right, as many of you I know do. So what is up with Kubernetes? Why is it important? And specifically at the Kubernetes operators technology when it comes to a database. Because it really helps us to automate both day one and day two operations, right? Really deploying the databases is an easy part. Making sure at scale you have a self-healing environment which can scale easily, right, without a lot of manual work, upgrade correctly, handle all kind of edge cases. That is a hard part. And operator technology in Kubernetes allows us to do it. It is still not quite database as a service yet because it's a different UX, and that can be more hairy compared to deploying database as a service in the cloud providers, which you can do in 2 clicks and an API call. But at the same time, the Kubernetes is a wonderful building block for modern database as a service. Here is a pool results from data on Kubernetes community, which shows what, if you look at the stateful applications on Kubernetes, databases are actually the #1 tenant which people are already running on Kubernetes. Also, if you look at number of public cloud solutions, many of them which have been put in production in the last couple of years are actually running on Kubernetes underneath, right? So with that, we can see what there are really many tens or hundreds of thousands of databases or database clusters are running on Kubernetes right now, right? And though it may require some, thinking and engineers to make it work, that is quite possible. At Percona, our approach to fully open source database as a service is using Percona monitoring and management as a GUI and also API endpoint to provide you database as a service experience in a fully open source mode, where you can install PMM, you can connect that to the Kubernetes, maybe on-prem, maybe in the cloud, manage Kubernetes service if you like that, and get database as a service experience. Our database as a service on PMM is not GA yet. It's a work in progress, but you're very welcome to try it out and experiment and maybe even contribute, make it work better for you. That is their power of open source, as I see that. Now, I wanted to end this presentation by saying a few words about Percona, and for those maybe who, while use our software, may not know where we come from as a company and what we really focus on. Here is a slide from the book we printed for our celebrating 15 years anniversary, which shows how far we have come up. And I think what is very important about Percona is what all the software which we ship is open source. I think that is a pretty unique in the industry. And what is interesting for me is I was probably for 15 years was saying, well, that's never going to work. That's never going to scale, right? And you can think about the Percona as a company which is running this radical open source experiment now going on for 15 years. And how has it been going for us? Well, this is one of the slides from our sort of marketing presentation deck, right? And what I wanted to show here is what we have quite a few customers, right? And we are growing pretty well as a company, right? While also we are able to do it in while maintaining a sustainable business. Percona never raised any venture capital, right, or some debt. And what that means is what that requires us to maintain sustainable business practices, right? And what that means is what we provide you, we can provide in a sustainable way. We don't need to come, well, you know what, now we spend most of the money we raised, now we have to turn it around, right, and start charging the actual prices, as sometimes happens in the industry. And I think that business approach, while it takes a longer time to grow, that is very good for community and for our customers. So if you think to finish it up, I wanted to maybe leave that 3 takes away about Percona in this case. We as Percona is very focused on success of our customers and open source database community at large. That is really we see as the very important core purpose of Percona. We really love open source, and we like doing open source for real, right? There is not quite a good, established terminology for that, right? But we can see right now, in many cases, open source is used kind of as a, marketing term, and when you look underneath, there is a lot of asterisks, and in the end, unless you are maintaining commercial relationship with a vendor, you can't really use the software at that scale. At Percona, we want to make sure what you can use our software successfully, right, wherever you are choosing to be our customer or not. But we want to make sure also we are providing so much value and so much love to you as a customer, it becomes irresistible to be one. And again, as I mentioned, sustainable business model is very important for us. Many people has been trusting us for more than a decade, and I want to make sure you can trust us for decades to come, and that is where sustainability is very important. That's all I have to say. With that, thank you.